just want to start by a small reflection on yesterday. I think we had a good day. When I opened the meeting yesterday, I said we would try to operate according to certain principles as a convention. Principles of openness, fairness, equality, efficiency, and collegiality. And I think by the end of the day, we probably had lived up to those principles. I thought last evening for dinner was very important. We had a chance to talk to each other. And for me, at least, I found the rich tapestry of Irish life was fully reflected. I had the pleasure of sitting beside Stephen Agnew, who grew up in Loyalist Belfast, but discovered his political home when he went to a barbecue organised by the Green Party and found they were nearly all vegetarians. And then I was talking to Hetty on table 5, rumbustious table 5, who told me about her grandfather, Dick Anthony, 6'9", size 13 shoes, and was a member of the Dáil as a Labour Party member in 1927. And then there was Finbar beside her, who is spreading the good news about the convention as he delivers the post around Kanturk. And then Charlie, table 1. His father was one of the great, we didn't talk about this last night now, one of the great political characters of Irish life, who when legend has it that when he first ran for the Dáil in 1943, he did it with his bicycle, with a sign on the front saying, "Here comes Oliver," and the sign on the back saying, "There goes Flanagan." Is that right, Charlie? Okay. So I think, overall, we had, I think it was important to establish these connections. Now, this morning, we are going to, you see the timetable. We're going to have a roundtable discussion on the first item, the voting age, which will start at 10:20. And I'll show you a proposed ballot paper in a moment. And then we will go to a roundtable discussion on the second item, on the presidential term. And again, we will show you a ballot paper, which we would like you to consider. And if the convention approves the ballot papers that we have, we will then vote on those ballot papers. We will then get to the coffee and subsequently go to the private session. And there we will be dealing, one of the first matters we will be dealing with is the election of the steering group, for which we have 10 or 11? 11 candidates. And we will give each candidate a very brief possibility to introduce themselves. So that will be the first part of the hour where we'll deal with rules and procedures. But the voting will have been done on the two substantive issues, will have been done by 12 o'clock, and the counting will happen between 12 and 1 o'clock. So by 1 o'clock, we will have a result, the first outcome of the convention. So that's the way we propose to proceed. So if I could firstly just take you through and introduce you to what we are proposing should be voted upon. And just to be clear, what we were asked to look at, as per the Oireachtas vote, was to consider whether reducing the voting age to 17. In reflecting the discussion yesterday, we're proposing that this would be these would be the options: leaving the voting age as it is, reduce the voting age to 17, or reduce the voting age to 16. And you were asked to vote on this in order of your choice, 1, 2, 3, in the same way as you would be voting in a presidential election. And the option that attracts the most support will be the one that the convention will have decided it wants. So that, in other words, if one option if no option receives majority support, less than 50%, then the lowest, the option that receives the lowest amount of votes will be eliminated, and there will be transfers then to distribute it as between the other two options. So I hope that's clear. And so that is, if you like, the substantive voting. But in order to reflect the discussion that we had yesterday, we are also asking you to indicate preference in regard to this, a yes, no, or a don't know, in regard to reducing the age of candidacy or reducing the voting age for some type of elections only, for example, local elections. We had a much longer list of things that were said yesterday, but we felt that in the interests of to keep things into manageable proportions, we should reduce it to these two issues. And these two issues, we are not, if you like, formally voting on them, but what we will, well, we are voting, we're voting yes, no, or don't know. But these are issues which will be reflected in the report of, you know, when we write up this report. I mean, so in other words, the report of our discussions this weekend will not be a simple matter of saying we are voting for one particular option. It will be a report which reflects, if you like, the diversity of the discussion that we had. So issues, for example, as the need for education, more education in schools about for younger people, will be included in the narrative of the report. So that is if that is the first issue. The second substantive issue we are asked to look at is to reducing the presidential term of office to 5 years and aligning it with the local and European elections. And these are this next slide shows the options on which we are asking you to vote. Leave the presidential term as it is, reduce the length of the presidential term to 5 years and align it to local and European elections, or reduce the length of the presidential term to 5 years, but don't align it to local and European elections. And again, vote 1, 2, 3, and again to see what is the option that attains majority support. And then as a second issue, these are the issues which, again, where we believe reflected in the conversation, the main issues which we believe were reflected in the conversation. President to be allowed to run for just one term. Citizens should be given a say in the nomination of presidential candidates, or reduce the age of candidacy for presidential candidates. So this is, if you like, our best effort at attempting to reflect the discussion yesterday. So we would ask you in your roundtable discussions to see whether you agree with this, whether these are the issues that you wish to vote on, or these are the other issues which you wish, if you like, to reflect on. So are there any questions? Have I been unclear about anything? Keith, David, yeah, firstly you. Keith, could we have rights, vote, or microphone?
Joe,
Keith, on the transferring of votes, just so I'm absolutely clear, of the three options that we're going 1, 2, 3 for, if one of them I absolutely don't want a transfer of votes, if I vote absolutely nothing,
you
in
have
that
the
box,
option not to express a preference.
Very good, thank you.
That's in political terms, it's called a plumper. David Norris. Again, name.
John Crotty. Mm-hmm. Just on the previous question, the second question there, reducing voting age for some types of elections only. I think there should be another question there, or reduce voting age for all types of elections, because you can, end up with some ambiguity. So if you vote on those, and then you come to the next one, you can be kind of contradicting yourself, or it's not clear.
David.
That's a fair point. So one possible option might be that for this one, reducing voting age for some types of elections, you could make it more specific and just say only reduce voting age for local elections.
Or other. Or other.
But it isn't the first one.
Yeah. No.
But that's why I say if you specify and say this one is now only, you're only asking whether you want to reduce the voting age just for local elections. Does that not? Because this one is already asking you, the first one is asking you, do you want to reduce the voting age, which is the original question. And in the second part, then you would be saying, okay, regardless of what I voted on the main question, would I be interested in reducing the voting age just for local elections?
Yeah, I think
But we
that's
could change it to
clear.
that.
Is it, John? I'm sorry?
What I'm suggesting, sorry, is that we would change the wording.
For all elections, I think you need to have that in on that page.
But we already have it.
Yeah.
But he's saying it's ambiguous.
No. If you answer the first one no, then you leave the next two blank. No?
Also in the first one. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I think the answer,
Yes.
yeah, I think the solution here is put in a third box to be absolutely clear, reducing the voting age for all elections or reducing the voting age for some type of elections. Is that okay?
Ed. I'm sorry for being pedantic, but if you do that, you're already asking it in the first question. So if you go back to the first bit again, what is being suggested here is we could just leave the voting age as is for all elections, reduce the voting age to 17 for all elections,
Yeah.
reduce the voting age to 16 for all elections, and then go to the next bit. Now you change this bit to reduce voting age only for local elections.
Yeah, okay. I think that's clear, yeah. Okay.
No, well, for some types of election only, example, local elections. We're not specifying it has to be local elections, you know.
We could.
Well, it depends what people want. You know.
I think we just reduce it
Okay.
just for local elections.
Okay, we better settle this now. John, I think your basic point was that if you like, it was on the second slide about whether yes, no, or don't know. But in fact, the first slide, it is clear that the voting age is for all elections.
We're going to enter the words all elections
For all
on every
elections.
line there.
Okay. And then the second slide where you're asked to express a preference is going to be for some type of elections. Is that okay? Yeah, fine. David.
Thank you. And may I say this was an excellent example of participatory democracy, that the people actually influence the way form of the election. But my question would be, and I found the whole thing extremely helpful and valuable, and I'm very glad I took part in it yesterday and today. But there were, as I recall it, two quite extraordinary areas of agreement where almost every table agreed, and that was on the presidential election. One of it was the access to allow the general citizenry to have a part in the electoral process. The other one was not quite as strongly, but it was also very strongly. There were the two ones that had the maximum degree of consensus. I cannot, I'm afraid, remember what the second one was. It was related. And I wonder, would it be possible to have a look at the slides again to see what those areas were? Is that possible? There were two that were quite extraordinary in the fact that a majority of the tables actually put them as one of the most important factors. And there were two of them. I can only remember one, and it helped me to judge the way the ballot is phrased if we saw what was the clear wish of the meeting.
No, but just I think what you're talking about is the discussion on the presidential term, but that's coming in half an hour. So that will be a different ballot paper. So at the moment we're only talking about the reducing the voting age. Oh, okay.
It's up there now.
Yeah, but it wasn't a minute ago when he was talking. I know. Oh, okay.
David, I mean, just in regard to this, we looked at, if you like, the full range of comments that were made yesterday, and we reduced the, if you like, the options for either voting or for preference voting down to the most significant ones. What anything else that was discussed yesterday will also be reflected in the report from the convention. So we were trying to, if you like, have a manageable number of issues on which to vote today. So is that okay? Yeah. Okay.
This should be discussed today.
I think what we can do is we will put those, if you like, those slides that we summarized yesterday up on the screen while you were discussing the particular issue. Thank you. Okay. Maureen.
Thank you. Just on the president running for one term only, are we talking about a term of 7 years as it currently is, or a term of 5 years?
Actually,
if there's a change.
That is a very good question. I think actually, the issue is when we're talking about one term only, are we talking about a term of 7 years or 5 years?
There were differing views around. There were different views around the room on that particular issue. So, again, as Tom is trying to suggest here, I think with these we're trying to capture as much as we can without overcomplicating things and having too many things to vote on. But there's going to have to be a draft report that will be written that the members will have to agree on, that is trying to set the context of the overall discussion about which we're voting. But there were people who were saying single presidential term of 5 years, single presidential term of 7 years.
But we need to see the first presidential slide, yeah, because we've jumped ahead a little bit.
Yeah, we haven't even got the rank
That's
order.
the second part of the presidential ballot.
So that's the first part of the presidential ballot.
It's 7 years.
Agree or disagree with the second 7 years. But what about those who was the second one then? Sorry, reduce the length to 5 years. Then when we vote on the second bit, we're saying a second term of 5 years. I think it's a bit unclear.
Yes.
I think there should be a space on the next bit
Yeah.
to say whether it's 5 or 7, that we're agreeing for a second term.
Yeah, I think that's manageable. I think if we could just add in maybe a 2, if you like, an A and a B, a 7 and 5. Okay? Thanks, Maureen. Yeah. Stephen.
Thank you, Stephen Agnew, and what should I say in future to the chair at dinner? It's related to David's point around the nomination process for presidential candidates, and I think certainly at my table there was a consensus that we need to have some kind of citizen access to a candidate, and it seemed to have a lot of support in the room, and whilst I appreciate it's reflected in the report, it may be easier for the government to ignore if it's not explicitly said that there was a majority of people felt this, you know, and I think it could be worth putting in some kind of question. I'm not sure that the other point David maybe was referring to was the issue of finance. You know, it shouldn't be a prohibitory factor for candidates. Now, I think that would be a more difficult one to put into a question. But certainly, I would hope that is also reflected in the report. You know, but the two things come together in saying that there should be better access for candidates. You know, it shouldn't be restricted to political class or the wealthy?
I think both of those issues actually can most effectively be dealt in the narrative of the report, actually. Any other comments? Yeah, Gillian. Or,
Kieran Egan. Just question one on the voting age.
Is that what we have?
Yeah.
Yeah, if you can bring it up.
Question one on the voting age. Back.
Yeah, sorry, I might have been answered now because I lost contact there for a minute. Leave the voting age as it is. If, say, 40 votes come for that, and 30 votes for reduce to 17, and 30 votes reduce to 16, then the first one is going to carry, isn't that right?
No, I let David Farrell is the great expert on voting systems. I'm going to ask David to explain it.
What we would be proposing in that situation is we have to see which one gets at least 50% of the support of the people, just like you have for a presidential election. So if you're saying we get 40 as the first one and 30 for the second and 30 for the third, then we know the first one has the greater amount of support of the members in the room, the other two have the least. We would then look at the number two options for the other two. So we would be taking the other two, looking at those who gave them as their number one. We'd look at what they gave as their number two to try and see if ultimately that produces the final. That would produce the final result, which would be that the number one would win.
The first one would have to be more than.
It would. The first one would win in that situation, but we would want to show in the final results that it has at least 50%. So we would carry out that count just to show that it does produce it.
Yeah, I think that's it. Thanks.
So it is a form of a single transferable vote, basically. David.
Just following on from that, it seems to me, if I'm interpreting rightly, that the first question asked is the cardinal question, is the principal question on which the others depend. If that is the case, and if a primacy of some kind is given to the format, so that the first question is the most important, then I would think that the participation of citizens in the nomination process should be number one, because the one that is number one had the support of two tables, whereas the second one, the one of the active citizens' participation, had the support of either 10 or 11 tables, and was by far the one with the greatest agreement of the entire day. So I'm just suggesting, if what's being said is that the first one, I'm not saying it's applying to this particular one, but it's a kind of question of a principle.
But I think we're moving on beyond tables expression. We're now giving the sovereignty, the voting sovereignty, to each of you to express a particular preference. I think that's the answer to that question. Avril.
Avril Power. Just one question that I think perhaps we're missing is, and it aligns with the strong feeling in the room yesterday that there should be greater citizen access, and I think that that will be clear when we vote on the question about opening up the nomination process. But I think for that to be meaningful, and this was evident in the discussion yesterday, we have to look at the expenditure limits, and I just wonder if that's the question that we're missing. I don't know if that's the one that David was referring to that you don't see there, but for me I think that's crucial, that people be given an opportunity to express a view on that, because otherwise it's kind of somewhat futile to say that anybody can run for the presidency, but that realistically to have any chance you have to be able to outspend both the parties and wealthier independents. So I think this expenditure cap is a question that I think is missing, that we discussed yesterday.
So would one set of wording, if we were to insert that, be something along the lines of that the expenditure cap should be reduced? How would that be an appropriate phrasing of that question? So we could insert, no?
No, because the partner is
This was the problem that came up in different ways.
The amount allowed without having to refer is nearly 3 times as much from any individual. Sorry, nearly 3 times as much. So there is a clear discrimination existing, and that will be maximized if you merely reduce the limit. You know, you'd have to examine. It's a complicated legal machine. It would need examination.
Yeah, I think it may be, this may be a quite a complicated issue to find a wording to vote on. I think it's obviously.
That the expenditure be reviewed.
Okay, David.
So would a wording along the lines of that that the members of the Constitutional Convention would vote on the issue of whether the expenditure rules should be reviewed?
Well, I would suggest that we leave it that the citizens have a say in the nomination and the expenditure be reviewed.
So would the wording
two
be
parts.
that we're leaving the other one in, but that we would then have an
Oh,
additional
yes,
line
yes.
that would say that the expenditure rules should be reviewed? You vote
Okay.
yes or no for that?
Gillian.
Hi, I'm Gillian, and I was just having a brief chat there with my colleagues. The difficulty is we didn't get enough information on that issue yesterday, certainly that we would feel we'd be taking an informed decision on expenditure. Like, I think it is a really important issue, but I also want to, when I'm voting, vote on an informed basis. So I have a hesitancy. I think I would find that question difficult to come down with an exact answer.
Yeah. Yeah, I have a certain sympathy with that view because, you know, when you get down to talking about expenditure limits, I mean, the question is, I mean, what might they be? So, you know, a sort of a general principle that you should have expenditure limits is fine, but it's actually a very small part of you know, a bigger question. Charlie?
Yeah, Charlie Flanagan, I just want to agree, and I think it would be a pity if this assembly were to be in some way unduly influenced by people here with a vested interest.
Okay. Okay. Sorry. I'm conscious that we are now eating into the time of the roundtable discussions on particular issues. Our basic purpose in this part was to put before you a proposal as to what are the key issues on which to vote, and the key issues based on the discussion yesterday on which you want to reflect an opinion. In other words, the second slide in each case regarding voting age and presidential term. If there are no further questions of clarification, I would prefer if we could get back to a roundtable discussion on the two issues.